Okay, so for all of you that are new for the very first time and you're like, why are these psychos handing me popcorn? All right. We do this every Christmas, a thing called Christmas at the Movies, and we take Christmas movies and use them as modern day parables to tell the Christmas story, okay? And this week, as you can see, was the old school version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which is my personal favorite, all right? The other ones are kooky and weird and a little bit, dark. All right, and so how many of y'all know you still like to look at some things where you can still see the drawings a little bit? It's not as graphically advanced as what we had to. And so today we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk a little bit of the history of this movie. All right. By the way, for those of us that like to learn new words every week, did you know that the word Grinch is taken from the French word Grinchot, which means grouchy? All right. It started off as a book written on December 26, 1957 by Dr. Seuss. It is in the top 100 of children's book. It is 61st among the top 100 picture books and the fourth of 5 of Dr. Seuss's books that are on that list. The Grinch was the first adult and first villain to be a main character in a Dr. Seuss book. And as of 2005, How the Grinch Stole Christmas has been translated into 9 different languages, including the dead language of Latin, okay? So 9 years later, after the book was written, they decided to turn the book into a movie, and they placed a high priority on voicing, all right? The actor who was the voice of the Grinch was also the voice for Frankenstein. His name is Boris Karloff, okay? Now, if you have never seen the original movie, I will bet that everyone in this room knows the voice of the man who sang, "You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch." All right, let me tell you where you know that. The man's name is Thurl Ravenscroft, and he, for 50 years, was the voice of Tony the Tiger from Frosted Flakes. They're great, So I was like, man, when you hear that deep baritone voice, I was like, man, that is so cool, all right? And so they did all this, and the first airing was on December 18th, 1966 on CBS, and 38 million people watched it, okay? Its earliest reviews said that the Grinch was the best Christmas villain since Scrooge, okay? The story tells us that the Grinch was a solitary creature who has a heart 2 sizes too small. He's annoyed by the town of Whoville's Christmas festivities. He is convinced that they think that Christmas is just about presents and ribbons and tinsel and trimming. And the Grinch thinks that if he can get rid of all these trappings, that he can prevent Christmas from coming. So he disguises himself as Santa Claus and breaks into every home and steals all the presents and the food for the Christmas Day feast and even the Christmas tree, all right? And he plans on Christmas Day to drop everything into the abyss, all right? Now, believe it or not, here's the first part of your feeling, all right? Believe it or not, The Grinch That Stole Christmas at its core is a story about empathy. Okay, some are like, what do you mean? You got to ask yourself the question, why was the Grinch so grouchy and mean? In 1982, Dr. Seuss wrote another book called The Grinch Catches the Cat in the Hat. And in this particular movie, it offers a reason. It said that the reason why the Grinch had resentment towards Christmas was the result of tragedy and trauma. The Grinch's mom died when he was young, and it left him perpetually sad and mean. To really appreciate the story of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, you have to understand the author, Dr. Seuss, because Dr. Seuss himself is the inspiration for the book. Years later, whenever the artist Chuck Jones was drawing the Grinch for the TV special, Dr. Seuss, who oversaw every detail, he's looking at this picture of the Grinch, and he goes, yeah, the Grinch kind of looks like me. And Chuck Jones, the artist, looked at him, in a smart aleck comment, and he goes, that sometimes happens. And so I looked at this, and the book says that the Grinch was 53 years old, and it's the same age that Dr. Seuss was whenever he wrote the book. The town of Whoville is based on Dr. Seuss's hometown of East Hampton, Massachusetts. And the mountain that's in East Hampton is called Mount Todd. That was the inspiration for Mount Crumpet, where the Grinch lived on top of this, all right? Now, at this time in his life, Dr. Seuss is also known as, his real name is Ted Giesel. He has just finished writing the wildly successful book, The Cat in the Hat, all right? And watch this. In this time, He's on the cutting edge of his field when he wrote The Cat in the Hat, because for years, kids who were learning to read were doing so by some boring books called Fun with Dick and Jane, okay? Some of y'all remember that and you're like, God, it was awful, all right? These books, the Fun with Dick and Jane's, were all about repetition. And most kids don't like repetition. But the way that Dr. Seuss wrote was based on phonics. And it made reading more fun. And as a result, watch this. The Cat in the Hat sold 250,000 copies and laid the foundation for an educational revolution in a way that kids would learn. This led him to begin a new publishing company called Beginner Book with his wife and 3 other people. However, in April of 1957, his wife had a stroke, and this led to lifelong health problems. Dr. Seuss this year now had the stress and fame of fame and the stress of newfound fortune, the pressure of starting a new business, and the anxiety of seeing his wife's health rapidly deteriorating before his eyes. In a magazine interview in Red Book, Dr. Seuss said this: I was brushing my teeth on the morning of December 26th when I noticed a very Grinchish countenance on my face. That picture that you saw where the Grinch had this big old smile, he said that was exactly how I looked. And here's what he said: I realized something had gone wrong with Christmas, or more likely, something had gone wrong with me. And I wrote the Grinch to see if I could rediscover something that I had obviously lost. Dr. Seuss said that because of the situation at this time, this was the easiest book that he ever wrote. He said the body of work took him only 3 weeks, with one notable exception. He was stuck for months on one thing. It was this: the conclusion. He said, as I wrote, I got hung up on how to get the Grinch out of the mess. It took me months to write the conclusion. And he said this: I just didn't know how to pull him out of the mess. And let me let you know, some of us, that's us today. Some of you may be saying, PC, I'm already ready for this Christmas season to be over. Some of us may feel like the residents of Whoville, where Christmas has gotten stolen from us. Some of us would look and say, Christmas is not what it used to be. As a pastor, I've heard so many broken hearts around the holidays. Some of us would say, this is my first Christmas without a loved one that's passed away. Some of you, you've even lost a spouse and I'm all alone now and I feel like such a drain on my family. I can't tell you how many different times I've heard this one. Christmas makes me feel even more divorce. More than one person has told me, this is not where I planned to be at this time in my life. Some people say Christmas has only served to remind me of what a financial failure I am because I can't get my family everything that they want. I've had people tell me this. Hey, I hate to be able to tell you this, but confession's, good for the soul, but it's bad for the reputation. And they'll tell me, PC, career-wise, Christmas could not be coming at a worse time because I'm up against deadlines, end of the year budgets, and now people are going to be taking off work, and it's really going to mess up things for me because I got to hit these deadlines, all right? Can I let you know I live my life bare before you. And in December of 2005, Jennifer and I were living in Atlanta, and I know exactly what many of you are feeling today. 2 months before, in October of 2005, after tens of thousands of dollars and multiple in vitro attempts, Jennifer and I were told we wouldn't be able to conceive. Jennifer ran a daycare of over 200 kids and was surrounded by kids all day long. She would come home in tears regularly. And we saw all these cute kids and Christmas pageants and the families with their kids all dressed up. And don't get me wrong, we were still happy for them, but we were just still devastated by our news, I mean, it's tough. That year, we said, why even bother with presents or even put up a tree? We were up at the church most of the time anyway, and so we didn't. I should have been a better husband during that time. We were just so beat to crap. We didn't know what to do. We just gave each other cash that year. We're like, hey, get whatever you want. And our thoughts during that time was, can we just hurry up and get the holidays over already? I know what you're feeling. And can I let you in on something? I don't think that we have more problems during the holidays. I just think we feel them heavier during the holidays. The holidays are a magnifying glass. Everything gets magnified during the holidays. The holidays will magnify the tension and the stress we have at home and at work. It's a huge magnifying glass for everything that's happening in our lives. But may I remind all of us today, now the sad news is over, I'm going to give you the good news, okay? Listen to me. May I remind all of us today that Christmas does not come to magnify our problems. It comes to magnify the message of Jesus. The message of Jesus screams at Christmas time. Listen to some of the words of the carols. My favorite is Hark the Herald Angels Sing. Glory to the newborn King. Peace on earth and mercy mild. What? God and sinners reconciled. You see, the message of Jesus is compromised when the messengers are distracted by our busyness and by our personal problems. And here's the thing that we got to come together and believe right now. Let's not get so busy with what's happening to us that we might miss what it could possibly happen through us. Because the holidays also magnify the good too. It magnifies the joys with our kids and our family and our friends. And today through the Christmas season and the message, God is reaching out even stronger than ever. If God is working on someone's heart and nudging them in his direction and trying to show them that he loves them, Christmas is a perfect time for it. Can I tell you what happened last night? At about 7:30, we're all kind of around, and all of a sudden I see this crowd assembling by our picture, the place where everybody gets the pictures. Guess what happens at the Christmas walk? We have had, 3,689 people come through, and one engagement took place. How awesome is that? All of a sudden I see this guy down on one knee, and this chick is just crying, and the parents are crying and everything. I was like, what just happened? All of a sudden, Timmy goes, dude, some dude just like proposed. And later on, as we're talking to them, the parents that are there, they're just crying. They said, we've been praying for years for this to happen. Wow. Because the message of Christmas, it magnifies Jesus. It magnifies people wanting to come together. And so let me let you know, so whenever the message gets magnified, we need to know, for those of us who that the holidays seem to be bringing gloom and doom, here's what I want to make sure we got to remind ourselves. We're not alone in this. Matter of fact, in 700 BC, the prophet Isaiah prophesies that the entire nation of Israel would feel just like some of us do today. Israel wanted to stop feeling like this and living like this and dying like this. And God knew that people didn't just need to change, they needed to be delivered, all right? And placed in a new and better situation. They're like, I need everything to change. Is there anybody in the house that would testify with Israel right now? I need everything to change. Check every box. I need it to change. Now watch this. God doesn't promise them fame or fortune or a vacation from their problems or even a new president that can shake things up. You see, God is going to give us exactly what we need this Christmas season. And let me tell you, well, what's he going to give us, PC? I'm so glad you asked. Look at verse 6. For unto us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will be placed upon his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and the peace, there will be no end. What Isaiah does here is describe 700 years before Jesus is born what he will do for us. And those of us feeling overwhelmed this season, we need to know who to call on, don't we? For there are so many names that Jesus wants to be known by for us during this season. The Bible says that his name will be called. The idea isn't that these are going to be the literal names of the Messiah. Instead, there are aspects of his character. Okay? They describe who he is and what he's come to do. Watch this, it's so important. You see, in Jewish culture, a name is not just your identify or distinguish a person. It expresses the very nature of their being. A couple of years ago, guess what I found out my name meant? God's warrior. Some of you are like, that is apt. Some of us knew me pre-Jesus, and they're like, this dude spent his whole life fighting. Now I get to fight for Jesus, all right? So here's the thing. Isaiah prophesied Jesus would be all of these things for us. And let's just take a quick trip about all the things that Jesus is going to be for us this season, all right? If you're dealing with confusion right now, notice with me. First, Jesus is our wonderful counselor. That name means wisdom beyond his abilities. He is beyond our finite comprehension and too marvelous for us to compare to anybody else. He knows us, watch this. He knows us completely, he leads us perfectly, and he is with us forever. He guides our faith and he guides our life. Can I tell you something? A good counselor can be trusted. Yes. Some of y'all know that several years ago, I began going on the inward journey and going and seeing a counselor. And the more the counselor gets to know you, the more the counselor helps you to understand yourself. And this guy, he was a retired minister, and his name's Greg. And man, we would just sit there, and I had to take this test and all this other stuff like that. God, it took forever. It's like 350 questions. So I've never even wondered how I'm wired up. And so I'm sitting there like, good God, I've never thought about myself this much in my life. Yes. Yeah. You know, and on a scale of 1 to 5, I'm like, God, I'm screwed up. Just help me, you know? And so I had to take this stuff. And Greg is talking to me, and one day he's looking at me, and he goes, let me guess about you. It goes, according to our conversations and all these tests that you've taken, I would bet you were a very reluctant convert, weren't you? I said, the most reluctant. I just didn't think I could ever live up to it. I was raised in church. And he said, the way that God has wired you up, Chad, it's kind of like an elephant. And I was like, great, a fat joke from a counselor. That's all I need. He said, no, your brain works a lot like an elephant. An elephant just doesn't go with everybody else. He goes when he's ready to go. He said, but notice with me, when an elephant gets in motion, nothing can stop him. He told me, he said, Chad, the majority of the world will work until they are 62 and retire and then begin to live. He goes, son, that will never, ever be you. He said, you're going to have a job for the rest of your life. And I was like, I kind of plan on it. For those of y'all like, when's Chad going to step aside? I'm going to keep on preaching until I don't make sense no more, if that's okay with y'all, all right? But that doesn't necessarily mean I want to all the time be running the church and something like that. There'll come a day where I'm like, we need some young blood because your boy getting tarred, all right? And so here's what I've learned. A good counselor can be trusted, but a good counselor, watch this, will also give you tools to be able to help yourself too. That's what Jesus does for us with his word. The next thing that we see that he was going to be for us, mighty God. This means he's strong. In the Bible, might is associated with collective strength. It's like might's like a massive army or a massive group. And Isaiah is telling you something about God. He goes, God don't need all that. He don't need not one person. He can do it all by himself. Revelation says that he will defeat the Antichrist and the false prophets and their armies. How? By the breath of his mouth. It'd be like something like this. And they're done. That is the type of the might that we're talking about. He's telling us, my spirit is going to give us everything that we're going to need this Christmas season to do this. God wants to say to some of us today, I will send the people when you need it. I will send the strength when you need it. And I will give you the resources when you need it. I will continually supply you with everything you will need. I got you, son. But sometimes we have more confidence in our ability to be able to do this. You know what? My question to us is, no, I can take care of this. My question to some of us today is this. Well, how's that working out for you right now, Mr. Hardhead? Because God sure has said that to me a lot in the past. God wants some of us to know, I am powerful enough to take care of this bill. I am powerful enough to take care of this sickness. I'm powerful enough to take care of this job. And many of us need to be reminded today, I am powerful enough to take care of your crazy family during this holiday season. And what God is telling all of us, I need you to draw near to me so that I can draw near to you and handle this stuff for you. Can I just give you a quick testimony? We have some people in this place right now that years ago they were on their last leg financially. Some people heard about their situation. Guess what they did? They blessed them with Christmas. The people who received the presents got God involved in their finances. Now, guess what? God has blessed them so much. Guess what they're doing this Christmas? They are now paying it forward and paying for Christmas for other people. They're like, you know what? They're like, how are y'all able to do this? So they got some of their friends. What's the matter, dude? You slinging rock again? What's the matter with you? What's going on? Or you go down to the casinos? He's like, no, it's better. Let me tell you about my Jesus. They're saying our mighty God has turned things around. We have now been blessed to be a blessing. We started paying him first. And by the way, ask them folks that are paying for Christmas for others if they believe tithing works. No, they're like, no, I got you. There are some of us that would testify, said, we have stared into the financial abyss, and God has pulled us back, and we gladly give him the first and above and beyond everything that we make. That's the mighty God that we're talking about. Let me tell you the next thing that Jesus would be for us, everlasting Father. I try to give you a Hebrew or a Greek word every week where you leave here feeling smarter. The Hebrew word for everlasting Father is Ave-ad, which describes him as the creator himself. He produces and he directs our eternity. That Hebrew word everlasting means this, watch this, in perpetuity. Some of y'all are business people in this room, all right? If somebody offers you a salary and gives you a deal in perpetuity, guess what that means? That means if you get a financial deal that says in perpetuity, this means this, you get a check for life. If the product keeps selling, you get a little bit of cut for that. In Jesus, here's what they are saying. Not only do you get a check for life, what he's saying is this, you get a dad for life. And you get a dad without end. He is going to be consistent. Many of us right now, we didn't have a good dad. I had the world's best dad. And it seems as if inconsistency with dads is the norm right now. And God has called us at Coastal Church to put a great big old dent in that. We're going to fix that in the days ahead. And even as Dr. Seuss, you know what? He struggled with consistency as a dad. On the 2003 unveiling of the Dr. Seuss stamp, you know what his stepdaughter said it in his acceptance speech? He said, I always thought that on his good days, my dad was like the Cat in the Hat. And on his bad days, he was the Grinch. You know, here's what I want to make sure that we know today. Jesus is not just any dad. Yeah. He's tender. Some of us had a dad who was always hard. Our everlasting Father is not that way. He's faithful. Some of us had dads who could never be counted on. They're just always busy, or maybe they were just stinking selfish. You know, when you look back, I was asking a guy a couple of years ago about his dad because we all kind of grew up together. I said, hey, how's your dad? And he goes, I hear from him a couple times a year. I was like, something happened? He goes, no, Dad's just selfish. And I was like, wow, can you imagine? He just said it so nonchalant. I was like, man, can you imagine that? Our God can be counted on. And not only this, he's a wise trainer. A great dad is a good trainer. Some of us had dads who not only gave us examples of what to do, but judging by society right now, the majority of dads are giving their children examples of what not to do. And I look at this and I look at that and I'm like, man, thank God for our everlasting Father who's a good trainer. He'll show us what to do and what to avoid. He's our provider. Some of us had dads who had to be chased down for their child support check. Jesus is not that way. He said, I got you well in advance. Don't you worry, all right? You are my child. I can take care of you better than any old dad anyway. You just do it. He's our guardian. He fiercely protects you. I remember when Evan, he's probably right about 2. And I'm usually a pretty light sleeper, but I'm sleeping one night, and Evan loves his mother, and he likes his dad. All right? Y'all know what I'm talking about? He loves his mama, all right? And especially whenever he was younger. So he's just about 2, and Jennifer wakes me up. She goes, hey, Chad, Evan's had a nightmare. And I was like, okay. And she goes, and I think her feelings were a little bit hurt. She goes, and he wants you. I was like, me? Did you hear him right? I mean, and she goes, no, he said, I need Dad. And I went in there, and I go there, and he's trembling. And I'm holding him, and I was like, hey, Buck, everything okay? And I had a nightmare real bad, and I'm sitting there, and I'm just patting him, and I'm like, it's okay, Dad's here, I'm Dad. And all of a sudden, I had one of the most tender moments I've ever had with my son. And in his broken English, he goes, thank you, Dad. And as I was in that nursery, and I'm holding him, I said, son, I will always come for you. That's the everlasting Father that you and I have. For those of us who feel all alone right now, you have an everlasting Father who will always, always come for you. And the final thing that Jesus wants to be for us is this, the Prince of Peace. The Prince of Peace, that the only way that somebody can bring peace to somebody is a transformation of the heart. Jesus came to earth to bring reconciliation. You know what reconciliation actually is defined as? The restoration of peace. Peace with God, peace with ourselves, peace with others. Reconciliation produces a peace of mind instead of panic and pressure. You and I can choose to have the peace of God right now. Reconciliation kills anxiety. We just have to believe it. Do you know the words for peace in Hebrew is the word shalom? The word shalom means this: the presence of the goodness of God. It's the presence of the wholeness and completeness. Shalom is what would be spoken about of Jesus when he was growing up. It said that he would have favor with God and man. That is shalom, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you are like, PC, right now I am so stressed out at work and everything. You know what you need? You need shalom. And guess what? When you have the peace of God, you will have favor with God and ultimately have favor with man. Before the angel gave the message shalom, he had to give him the first message, and it was this: don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I got you. The message from God was, I love you, I believe in you, I forgive you, I am going to take care of this. And guess what? They all ultimately said, the angel said, peace to men on whom his favor rests. Boy, Lexus just killed that song earlier when she said, for the joy of the Lord, he was born. For the joy of the world, he was born. Because the Prince of Peace has come. Shalom, the peace of God is now possible. Some of us right now, you've thought that the presence of goodness of God sounds too good to be true. Some of you are like, I don't know, PC, I've done a lot of stuff. Can I give you the first piece of good counseling? Don't try and forgive yourself, okay? Don't try to forgive your own sins. Forgiveness is not something that we do. It's a gift we receive. We can't earn it. Right. Some of you are like, PC, I'm here and I've had an abortion. I do drugs regularly. I sleep around and I'm an alcoholic. Look at me. Half of the New Testament was written by a serial killer named Saul, okay? He later changes his name to Paul. God used a guy with a past to help people with their past. You know what? For years, you know why the early church grew? Because they're like, look, I may be a sexual freaky deaky, but I wasn't no serial killer. And so they looked at Paul and they're like, I guess if God can forgive this psycho, and maybe he can forgive me because, you know, I sometimes wake up in the wrong bed sometimes. And maybe I sometimes abuse substances. And maybe sometimes, you know, during the holidays, all I do is drink. The reason why you're drinking is because you don't have the peace of God yet. But you're going to have it before you leave here today. Listen to me. Paul dealt with the shame of his past. And you can actually tell it in his writings. He said this, I'll tell you one thing. I got past my past by learning to press on to my future. And God used that serial killer to plant churches all over the world. Some of us have been going through some bad times lately, and I wanted to remind you, God did not create the bad, but he can create good from the bad. That's right. And sadly, far too many of us are not taking him up on his ability to do this. Some of us today need to say, I'm sorry that all this happened. God, I know that you didn't do this, but God, what do you want to bring good from this? Today, I'm free from it. I'm going to let God turn it for good. It'll bring healing to us. And the challenge is this right now, that we could just be distracted. Fight against it. That's right. Okay? The names of Jesus will give us all that we need to know his character and what he needs to, and what we need him and what we want from him to be for us this Christmas. Names are so important, aren't they? Let me give you one final Dr. Seuss story that you'll never forget. In the midst of all the book and the movie's popularity, two young boys wrote Dr. Seuss a letter. Their names were Bob and David Grinch. They complained to Dr. Seuss that they were getting teased because they shared the last name as a monster. And Dr. Seuss wrote them back almost instantly and emphatically said, no, tell the kids the Grinch is not a monster, he's a hero. He said this, he's a hero. Why? Because he's a changed man. And Dr. Seuss reminds them, this is the last thing that he tells them in his letter to him. He said this, remember, guys, it's not where you start, it's where you end up. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, some of us, we may have started this season as the Grinch, but you can begin right now walking in the promises of God for this season. It brings us back from the abyss and the challenges that we face, and it replaces us with the peace and the power and the clarity and the strength and the joy of the season. These promises of God snaps us back to reality of the season, and it blesses our life, and that is how the Gulf Coast will be saved. Let's pray. Father.